Good evening. That was the Yahrzeit Nigun by Shlomo Katz. We're very emotional. Last night, we're celebrating Rosh Chodesh, entering the month of Adar. When Adar enters, joy increases. Here in our minyan, our neighborhood minyan, with all the guys. I'm one of the oldest guys in our minyan. It's a very young minyan. Very few guys older than me. Most of the guys could be my sons. And so every Rosh Chodesh, we have a nice get together. We had a nice outdoor place, smoking cigars last night. And toward the end of the evening, the news came in that one of the guys from our minyan, who was not with us, because he was able to take a trip with his wife. They have 5 young kids, and his parents flew in to watch the kids for a few days. So, you can imagine how hard young parents with 5 young kids. I think the baby's 7 months old. The oldest is like 10 or 11 years old. And so his parents going to watch the kids, and Joel and Leora could take a trip, and they went to Colorado to go skiing. And last night they were in a horrific car accident, and this young, beautiful mother was taken from this world. Joel was injured, but nothing life-threatening, and in fact, was able to get back to LA today, and I just saw him 3 hours ago. About less than 3 hours ago at the funeral, and I was able to hug him, and was not able to drive out to the cemetery, so I could teach this class really. But I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of people were at this levaya. I mean, a young, beautiful mother, probably early 30s. Sometimes people are ill, even young people. I've talked a bunch of times about our good friend Moti, who was taken from us in December, but he was ill for quite a while. This was just so sudden. No one prepared. And her mother, I will never forget this, the mom wailing for her daughter and saying, "Why, Hashem, why? Take me instead." And as we were all walking up the street, escorting Joel and to the casket, to the hearse, and the vehicles that were going to take everybody that was going to the cemetery, they were stopping traffic, and no one was moving for about 15 minutes. And Leora's mother was in one of the vehicles with her window open, sobbing and calling out to the crowd, do good, love each other, learn Torah, do mitzvahs, don't speak Lashon Hara, bring Mashiach by treating each other good and doing mitzvahs. So there's a shiva starting, tonight. And I can't believe that what we're learning today, our daf, is what happens when the principal mourner travels. When does the Shiva start exactly? Just as we're learning that, this happened today. So we dedicate our learning today to Leora Ezuri. May her neshama, her soul, have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world of souls. And we say amen. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. We're just crushed. And as I was walking away from the funeral and away from, all these people huddled together, we're all hugging each other. I was walking away, and I was thinking, and Joel at the funeral in the synagogue was saying, he lost the love of his life. He loved her so much, and they were skiing just yesterday, I guess, and I can't even remember exactly what the story, but it was like, she was scared on the slopes, and and he said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay," and she trusted him, and she was strong, and he said, "She's my Ashes Heil, a woman of valor." And I was just thinking about that as I was walking away, and how much I treasure Nina. Nothing is promised. Every moment together is a blessing. And I was thinking, like every couple, from time to time, we just fight about stupid things, unimportant things. And how dumb that is. And how important it is to appreciate each other. And I was just thinking, as I was getting in my car and just thinking about how much I treasure Nina, how much I appreciate her, how much I love her. And then I closed the door, and I just hadn't noticed. So where I was parked on Beverly Boulevard in Los Angeles, like right in front of my window, directly in front of me, was El Coyote, the restaurant, bar, where we met 25 years ago on New Year's Eve. Just as I'm thinking this, there's the place where we met. No accidents. All right, let me pull it together. I have prepared the daf. I actually ended up reading it on my phone, so I didn't take notes in the book. But we're doing the whole daf, so hopefully it should be fine. I've been through it, and I won't need the notes. So, okay, let's just do this. We pick it up at the bottom of 21b, chapter 3. We're learning the 4th Mishna. The sages taught the following baraisa: if a mourner comes to the house of mourning from a nearby place during the first 3 days of mourning, he counts his days of mourning with the other mourners from the time of the burial and completes his mourning with them, right? So, if one of the mourners had to travel to get to the house of mourning, he doesn't get there on the first day. So is he going to count 7 days from when he gets there and begins the mourning? He personally begins the mourning? Or does he just sit in with the other mourners who have already counted a day, and so he's going to end up only doing 6, but he's just included in the family mourning, as it were. So he counts with the mourners as long as he gets there in the first 3 days. And this is the case even if he may end up observing mourning for only 5 or 6 days. But if he came from a distant place, so then he counts on his own 7 complete days from the time that he was informed of his relative's death. From this point forward, i.e. after the first 3 days of mourning, even if he came from a nearby place, he counts 7 days on his own. If he doesn't get there in the first 3 days, he's going to have to do 7 days on his own. Rabbi Shimon says, even if he came on the 7th day from a nearby place, he counts and completes the 7-day period of mourning with the other mourners. So in other words, if he didn't hear about it or was detained traveling, and he wasn't able to actually observe Shiva until he got to the rest of the family on their 7th day, then that's all he's going to do. He's included with their mourning. He's not going to start his own 7 days, according to Rabbi Shimon. So let's just, before we go on, since we're going to be studying this subject for a bit, where does this end up? What is the halacha? In a case where one's close family member died, and he did not know until he reached the place of the mourners, if he came from a nearby place, which is less than 10 parasangs away, then he joins with the other mourners, even if he arrives on the 7th day. Nowadays, a nearby place is defined as any distance that one can reach in a single day's travel using modern forms of transportation. I mean, that's pretty much anywhere in the world, right? You can get almost anywhere in one day, unless it requires going, through, after the airport, extreme travel. One joins the mourners if he still finds people who came to console the principal member of the household, even if they have stood up to leave. And similarly, such a person also counts the 30-day period of mourning with this group. If he does not find consolers, then he observes 7 days of mourning on his own. Similarly, one who comes from a distant place counts his own 7 and 30-day periods of mourning from the day on which he arrived, even if he arrives on the 2nd day. Right? So if you're in that kind of a situation where a close relative died, but it took you a few days to get, to the Shiva house, and you're not sure whether you're going to now count 5 days, let's say, with the rest of the mourners, or you're going to count your own 7 days, that is a question you ask your rabbi. A dilemma was raised, and the master said, citing the Baraisa, if a mourner comes to the house of mourning from a nearby place during the first 3 days of mourning, he counts his days of mourning with the other mourners and completes his mourning with them. And Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, this is in a case where the principal member of the household is in the house, and therefore all the other members follow his mourning. Who's the principal member? The one with the closest relative to the deceased, or the most prominent member of the household. And if the most prominent member of the household is in the house, therefore all the other family members follow his mourning. If, however, it is the principal member of the family who comes home, who's the one traveling, he certainly does not follow the other members, but rather he counts 7 days on his own. A dilemma was raised before the scholars. Now we're at 22a proper. If the principal member of the household went with the remains of the deceased to the cemetery and did not If the principal member of the household went with the remains of the deceased to the cemetery and did not return for several days, what is the law? If another mourner came to the house of mourning during his absence, does he follow the principal member of the household and count from the time of the burial? Or does he count from the time that the funeral procession departed like the other members of the household? Right now, this can easily happen. Recently, right, when our friend Moti Kess died, so they took the body to Israel and, fly to Israel, do a funeral in Israel, and his father and his brothers all went with the mace to Israel, and then they returned, and by the time they returned, it could be the second day, it was the second day, it could easily have been the third day. If somebody, his mom didn't go, his wife didn't go, so they would have started mourning already. Or do they wait until the father and the son come back, or the father and the brothers come back, right? So it's this kind of timing issues, very nuanced, very delicate. The Gemara answers, come in here that which Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said. Even if the principal member of the household went to the cemetery, the mourner who comes home during his absence counts with them, i.e. the other members of the household who did not go to the cemetery. The Gemara asked, does he really count and complete his mourning with them? But isn't it taught otherwise in a Baraisa that he counts 7 days on his own? What is the halacha? The law. Some say that in a case where a person arrives and finds the principal member of the household has gone to tend to the needs of the dead, then if the principal member returns within 3 days, it is as though he was home with this person when this person arrived, and this person is considered to be one of the members of the household. Therefore, he counts the days of the mourning period with this group. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. This statement that he counts with them is referring to a case where the principal member of the household came within 3 days. And the other ruling that he counts on his own is referring to a case where he did not come home within 3 days. This conclusion is similar to what Rav said to the sons of Hatzlaponi when they were in mourning. Those who come home within 3 days should count with you, whereas those who do not come home within 3 days should count on their own. Rava said to the people of Mechoza, those of you who do not follow the coffin all the way to the place of interment should begin counting your days of mourning from when you turn your faces from the city gates to return home. Since the dead were commonly transported long distances and buried far away, most of the mourners did not accompany their deceased relatives to the actual site of the burial. The Gemara cites the Baraisa taught above. Rabbi Shimon says, even if one of the mourners came on the 7th day from a nearby place, he counts with the other mourners and completes the 7-day period of mourning with them. Rabbi Chia bar Gamda said that Rabbi Yosef ben Shaul said that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, and this is the law, the halacha, provided that he came and found consolers still present in the house. Rav Anan asks, if the consolers had already stirred themselves to stand up and leave, but did not yet actually stand up and leave, what is the law? Is it considered as if the consolers have already left or not? The question was not answered. Taiku, it remains unresolved. The Gemara relates that a colleague of Rabbi Abba Bar Chia learned the following principle as a tradition from Rabbi Abba. The Gemara asks, and who was this colleague? It was Rabbi Zera. And some say a different version of this tradition. A colleague of Rabbi Zera learned a tradition from Rabbi Zera. The Gemara asks, and who is this colleague? Well, it was Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Rabbi Yochanan said, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to an animal that is unsuitable for human consumption that because of a severe organic disease or congenital defect, making it a treifa. And the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon with regard to the halachas of mourning. So the Gemara explains. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon with regard to mourning, concerning that which we just said about a mourner who arrives on the seventh day. And the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to the defects in animals that render them treifa, concerning that which we learned in a baraisa. So you may have heard the word treif. That's treif, right? And when we say that, we mean it's not kosher. It's just something that a Jew can't eat because it's not kosher. That's what the word treif has come to mean. But a treifa is actually a specific word, and it means a kosher animal that has been rendered unkosher because it has some kind of a condition, like either an injury or a disease that's going to cause it to die, without being slaughtered within, I think, a year. One of those conditions particularly is like if it swallowed a needle and its intestine is punctured, I think, or if a lung is punctured. So then it's a treifa. That's something that the butcher only finds out after, or the shochet, they only find that out after it's been slaughtered in a kosher manner, but then they start cutting it up and they said, oh, wait a minute, this is a treifa. And so, it could be a very valuable, piece of meat, a whole cow, that now can't be eaten by Jews. So that's a treifa. So why are we talking about treifa now? Simply because there were two rulings. One is about mourning, the other is about a treifa, but they kind of travel together because of their source. Okay, so the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to the treifa, concerning that which we learned in a baraisa. If an animal's intestines became perforated, right, but the hole was stopped up by mucus so that nothing comes out of this hole, then the animal is fit. It's not a treifa, it's kosher. Unlike an ordinary hole in the intestines, which would render the animal a treifa, this hole does not render the animal a treifa and make it unfit for consumption, because it's like the animal healed itself. It wouldn't have died from that hole. This is the statement of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And the Gemara asks, what is this mucus? And Rav Kahana said, it's the fat of the intestines that comes out under pressure. Someone whose name was not given said, may I merit to go up to the land of Israel and learn this halacha from the mouth of its author. When he went up from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael, he found Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and said to him, did the master say that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to defects that render an animal a treifa? He said to him, I said the opposite, namely, that the halacha is not in accordance with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and therefore such a hole in the animal's intestine does make it unfit for eating, does render it a treifa. So he asked him again, well, what about the ruling reported in your name that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon with regard to mourning? Is this accurate? He said to him, the issue is subject to dispute. As it was stated, Rav Chisda said, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and similarly, Rabbi Yochanan said, it is the halacha. But Rav Nachman said, it is not the halacha. And the Gemara concludes, by the way, sometimes I say halacha, and sometimes I say halacha. Halacha is more, Hebrew correct, and halacha is how people talk. Okay. So the halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to the aforementioned issue of a treifa. And the halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon with regard to mourning. As Shmuel stated a principle, the The halacha follows the opinion of the more lenient authority in matters related to mourning, right? So what was the original opinion? And it is that, right, so a mourner gets to the house of mourning, and it said that he could just join in with their mourning and not have to do his own 7 days. But what if he comes right at the end of the Shiva? So, like, if the consolers have left, that Shiva is over. But what if the consoler, like the morning service is over, and the people are sort of getting ready to leave, but they haven't left yet? Is the Shiva over or not? That's that question. And so we're saying that in matters of mourning, we always take the more lenient opinion. So the more lenient opinion would be, well, they haven't left the house, so it's still the Shiva. So this guy arrived in time to join in the Shiva. Even though he wasn't there for the 7 days, he doesn't observe his own 7 days. Is he permitted to observe his own 7 days? I don't know the answer to that question. He'd have to ask his rabbi. Okay. It was taught in a baraisa, with regard to all other deceased relatives, it is praiseworthy for one to be quick in taking the bier, B-I-E-R, out for burial. But in the case of one's father or mother, acting in this manner is condemnable, as one should draw out the period of acute mourning for his parents. Right? So the bier, do we use a bier now? I mean, remember in the old days, they didn't use coffins and they didn't bury people in the ground. Right, they would put them in some kind of a crypt, right, and then or even just bury them in shrouds only for enough time for the bones to decompose, and then they would relocate the bones, to the family crypt or something like that. Different practices than we have today, but still the question applies very much today. Do we expedite getting the remains of the loved one into the funeral, into the cemetery plot? And so here the principle is that if it's not your parent, then yes, it's respect for the dead to lay the person to rest as quickly as possible, as expeditiously as possible. I mean, Leora died last night. The funeral was this afternoon. The burial was today during daylight. But for a parent, you don't rush it. Now, still, the Jewish practice is, if possible, to get the body, the corpse into the ground within 24 hours, if possible. But you're going to kind of prolong it as long as it's within Jewish law. Occasionally, it happens that you can't do it within 24 hours. Again, these are laws that you consult with a rabbi. But within the Jewish framework, within the halachic framework, when the dead is somebody's parent, you're going to sort of prolong it as much as possible. And that is out of respect to one's parent. If, however, it was Friday or the eve of a festival, then one is praiseworthy for expediting the parent's burial, because he does this only out of respect for his father or mother. He does not want them to remain unburied for the duration of Shabbos or the festival. With regard to all other dead, if the mourner wishes, remember, who is a mourner if it's not for a parent, right? We're all mourners when someone that we love dies, but an official mourner is for a parent, and that's the most important and intense case, or for a spouse, a sibling, or a child. All right, where am I? And then beyond that, if it's a relative, it's considered an indirect relative. You're an indirect mourner with regards to who sits Shiva, right? Who has the most obligations in a Shiva. Okay, where am I? So if, however, it was Friday, so if waiting around a little bit because you want to prolong taking your parent to the cemetery is going to mean that it's not going to happen on Shabbos, right? Because if this happens on a Friday, if this was tomorrow, God forbid, and then and then the body would have to just kind of wait to be buried until Sunday. That we don't do. So if somebody died on Friday morning, we try to get them into the ground Friday that day. If it's somebody's parent. With regard to all other dead, if the mourner wishes, he may reduce his business due to mourning. If, however, he wishes not to do so, he need not reduce it. In the case of a father or mother, he must always reduce his business. Now, we've already talked about that you're not allowed to work during the Shiva with certain exceptions. Here we're talking about even beyond the 7 days. He may reduce his business. What is the law? One who is mourning over a close relative may choose whether or not to limit his involvement in business activities. However, one who is mourning over his father or mother is required to lessen his involvement in these activities. The question is for how long, and we'll be talking more about that. Okay, we're on the B side of page 22. With regard to all other deceased relatives, if the mourner wishes, he may remove his garment from one of his shoulders. You know what? There is a note about this. He may reduce his business. Yeah, there's a note here from Rav Steinsaltz. Rav Hai Gaon explains that one who spends all day in his business must work for fewer hours. And the Jerusalem Talmud explains that one who is mourning over his father or mother may not leave his home for business endeavors even after 30 days, until such time as his colleagues rebuke him. That's going to be related to when do you get a haircut if you've lost a parent. So again, these laws of, when do you go back to work, and do you adjust the amount of work that you do and the mode of working? A lot of nuance to these laws, right? That's why there's whole books written on Jewish mourning practices, and if you're ever in that situation, get one of those books. And certainly talk to your rabbi. That's the main point. Okay, so with regard to all other deceased relatives, meaning not a parent, if the mourner wishes, he may remove his garment from one of his shoulders, and if he wishes not to remove it, he need not remove it. However, in the case of his father or mother, he must always remove his garment from one of his shoulders. That's something we don't do anymore. That was in ancient times, the kind of old cloaks that they wore then, and they would tear it so that it would fall off the shoulder. There was an incident when the father of a leading authority of his generation died, and the authority wished to remove his garment from one shoulder. Another leading authority of the generation also wished to remove his own garment together with him in order to join him in his mourning. But due to this, the first person refrained and did not remove his garment so that his colleague would not remove his garment as well. Right, so we don't do this anymore, but in ancient times, they would tear the garment so that it would come off the shoulder as a sign of of respect and sorrow for the loss of a parent. Now, because this is, basically a very undignified way to wear your clothing, the leading Torah scholar of a generation who has to maintain dignity for the sake of the honor of Torah and God, could he do that? Okay, well, maybe he could do that for his parent. But now his friend, who is another leading Torah authority, wants to join him, out of empathy, right, and compassion, and join him in that mourning. But now you would have the two leading scholars of the generation, both wearing clothing that is undignified and sort of unbecoming of their stature, right? And so they didn't do it. Now, Abaye said the leading authority of the generation mentioned here is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, who edited the Mishna. And the leading authority of the generation who was with him was Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha. And some say the first leader of the generation was Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, and the one who was with him was Rebbe. And the Gemara examines the issue. Now, granted, according to the one who said that the leading authority of the generation who was with him was Rebbe, so this is the reason that he refrained and did not remove his garment from his shoulder. That is to say, the first one, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, refrained from doing so because he did not wish to cause Rebbe, who was the Nasi, not just the leading Torah authority, but the head of the Sanhedrin, and it's just not acceptable that he should walk around, with his shoulder bare. And so therefore, Yaakov Bar Acha said, well, you want to do this to commiserate with me, I'm not even going to do it so that you won't do it. But according to the one who said that it is Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha who was the leader, who was the one accompanying him, why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi refrain and not remove his garment from his shoulder? Right? If the Nasi decides he's going to remove his garment from the shoulder, then the other one, who's also a leading Torah authority, but he's not the head of the Sanhedrin, it's not a further, demeaning type of garment for people of their stature to be wearing. Now that already the most important person has bared his shoulder, it's not so bad that the one who's almost at his level does too. That's the question being asked. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the father of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, was also the Nasi, the one who died, right? And everyone is required to remove his garment from his shoulder for him, as was so if Rebbe's father died, but Rebbe's father was the Nasi. When a Nasi dies, back in the old days when they would bare the shoulder, the entire nation would bare a shoulder as a mark of respect for the loss of the Nasi. So in that case, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha would also have been required to bare his shoulder. Why then would Rebbe prevent him from doing so? The Gemara concludes, Kasha, this is difficult. The Gemara returns to the continuation of the Baraisa. With regard to all deceased relatives, except for one's parents, one may cut his hair after 30 days. But so you don't cut your hair until the Shloshim, until 30 days, if you lose a spouse, a sibling, or a child. But if you lose your mother or father, then it's a longer period where you don't get a haircut. How long? It's not defined by a number of days. In the case of one's father or mother, one may not cut his hair until his colleagues have rebuked him for his hair being too long. With regard to all other deceased relatives, he may enter a place where a joyous celebration is taking place after 30 days. In the case of his father or mother, he may enter such a place only after 12 months. On this idea that you don't cut your hair until your colleagues tell you, hey, you're looking shaggy, you need to cut your hair. Like, when is that? When they notice? When you become extreme? That's going to be different for every person, their situation, what their job is, who their colleagues are. That's very, very subjective and variable, and perhaps that's the whole point. So I read a nice vort on this from, I think, Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. There's a daily daf email. I just want to see where I saw this today. Elliot? Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. And what he was saying, very beautiful idea, is that, if indeed a person doesn't get their haircut until their colleagues say, hey, you need a haircut, and when is that? Well, what that does is it creates an ongoing responsibility, right? So if your friends or your loved ones, people you care about, even just colleagues at work, have lost a parent, so it's like you got to keep track of them, right? During the Shiva, the whole community comes out and consoles the mourner. Until the Shloshim, it's quite recent, and you think about him, and you give him a hug when you see him or her, and you're connected to them. After 30 days, right, there's the Robert Frost poem, Out, which is about a death in a workplace and how everybody gathers and is shocked and saddened. And then at the end, the body is taken away, and the last line of the poem is, and they, since they were not the ones dead, turned to their affairs, right? Everybody else gets on with their life. Even after a funeral, you're moved, you think about what's important in life, maybe for a few minutes, maybe for a few hours, maybe for a few days, and then you just get involved in your own stuff. But if it was your job to keep track of your friend, and as they're getting shaggier and shaggier, and at a certain point you say to them, I think that hair's grown enough, I think it's time. It's going to be more than just a passing comment. Like that's a connection that you really have with that person in the midst of their mourning. And maybe that's a really beautiful practice. The haircut for a mourner, what is the law? One who is mourning a deceased relative other than his parents may cut his hair after 30 days. After the death of his mother or father, the mourner must wait to cut his hair until his colleagues rebuke him, meaning for having too long. And a festival does not interrupt this aspect of the mourning. Even though a festival would interrupt a Shiva and a Shloshim, it doesn't interrupt this idea that you let your hair grow. there is a dispute with regard to the amount of rebuke he must receive, and the accepted practice is to wait 3 months to cut the hair on one's head. However, a man may trim his beard before this. In some places, it is customary for a mourner not to cut his hair for 12 months, if it is not absolutely necessary to do so. So even in modern times, there's a lot of variety about how this is practiced, right? And this idea of 3 months, the accepted practice is to wait 3 months. So that's a comfortable time, and that's what most people are doing. But you don't have to. Maybe you decide you want to let your hair grow longer for longer than that. And then it's, going to be your friends to say to you, are you sure you want to do that? Maybe it's time, right? All right, let me find where I was. Okay, so that's with the haircut. Now, with regard to all other deceased relatives, he may enter a place where a joyous celebration is taking place after 30 days. But in the case of his father or mother, he may enter such a place only after 12 months. Rabbi Bar Chana said, the ruling that a mourner may enter a house of joy after 30 days applies specifically to a joyous social gathering. That is to say, to the joyous meals that a group of friends would eat together, each taking a turn hosting. But this ruling does not apply to a large joyous occasion such as a wedding feast. And the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa which adds, and also for joyous social gatherings, 30 days. This implies that when the Baraisa speaks of joyous celebrations without further specification, it is not referring to joyous social gatherings, but even to weddings and other joyous occasions. The Gemara concludes this is difficult. So what they're distinguishing between is you're a mourner. After 30 days, you could go to weddings, you could go to bar mitzvah, you could go to a bris. You lost your parent, how long? And they're going to distinguish between going to that kind of an event, like a wedding, a community event like that, or the type of thing like where you have a group of friends where they take turns hosting parties. So there's actually an obligation, right? Like, it's like a moving poker game, for example, right? It keeps moving from house to house. There's 6 guys in the game. Every 6 weeks, you host, right? So if you play in that game, you're undertaking that every 6 weeks, you will host. What happens when your turn comes up? Obviously, poker, I'm being facetious, but if it's more like just dinners, but there's this round of dinners where if you're part of that group, you're, agreeing that you will host on a regular basis, that's going to have a different outcome than just whether or not you can attend a wedding in your community. The Gemara answers, La Kasha, this is not difficult. This ruling of the Baraisa is referring to an initial gathering, when the mourner is the first in the group of friends to host. And the Baraisa teaches that in such a situation, the mourner is required to wait at least 30 days before doing so. That ruling of Rabbi Bar Chana is referring to a reciprocal gathering, meaning the mourner's friends have already hosted these gatherings, and now it is his turn to host. Since he is required to host such a gathering for his colleagues, he need not postpone it. Rather, he may host the group immediately. The Baraisa continues, with regard to all other deceased relatives, one rends his garment the length of a handbreadth, and that suffices, right? When you hear that your relative has died or you witness it, you tear your garment. And how big a tear? At least a handbreadth. But if the deceased is your mother or father, God forbid, so he must tear his garment until it reveals his heart, a much more profound tearing of the garment. Rabbi Abahu said, what is the verse that teaches that the rip must be a handbreadth? From 2 Samuel 1:11, and David took hold of his clothes and ripped them. And taking hold cannot be done for a garment less than grabbing a handbreadth. So that's where they derived that. And the Baraisa teaches further, with regard to all other deceased relatives, even if he is wearing 10 garments, one on top of the other, he rips only his outer garment. But in the case of his father or mother, he must tear them all. Failure to tear his undergarment, however, does not invalidate the fulfillment of the mitzvah. The law of tearing. What is the halacha? One who is mourning a deceased relative, other than a parent, is required to rip only his outer garment 1 handbreadth. If he tore his inner garment, it is acceptable after the fact, but you should tear the outer garment, although others disagree and require him to tear his outer garment. At the death of one's father or mother, he is required to tear all of his garments until he exposes his heart. It is also the accepted practice to tear one's garment on the left side over one's father or mother, and on the right side over other deceased relatives, over your heart for your mother or father, over the other side for other relatives. There is a dispute with regard to the term apikarsuto. Some say that it refers to an undergarment that is worn directly against the skin, and others say that it refers to an outer garment. The accepted practice is never to tear an outer cloak. You don't tear your coat, right? However, an undergarment should be torn. The Rima writes that the Ashkenazic custom is to tear neither one's outer garment nor one's innermost garment. Instead, one is required to tear his second outermost garment over deceased relatives. But over one's mother or father, he must tear all of the middle garments between the outer one and the one closest to his body. Right? So, for instance, if this, I would be, I would not tear the jacket, I would tear the shirt, but I wouldn't tear the undershirt that I have underneath it. I have seen definitely blazers, suit jackets torn. I saw that at Moti's, but perhaps they were wearing a coat over that. Right. Okay, where was I? Both a man and a woman are required to tear their garments. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, a woman first rips her inner garment and turns it around so that the tear is on her back, and only afterward does she rip the outer garment so that she does not expose herself. With regard to all other deceased relatives, if one wishes, he may rip apart his garment on the hem, rather than merely expanding the neck hole, so that the tear stands out distinctly from the opening of the garment. If he wishes not to do this, he does not rip apart the hem in this manner. That is to say, one may simply enlarge the neck hole, although rending a garment in this way makes the tear less prominent. But in the case of one's father or mother, he must always rip apart the hem. And what they're saying is, you could just kind of open the neck, and it's torn, but it might not be that noticeable. But when you lose your mother or father, you need to tear your garments in a way that's like, whoa, that guy is wearing utterly ripped up, like very noticeably, right? Very noticeable. These garments are ruined. You're never going to wear them again. For other relatives, you could repair the garment somewhat. But if you lose your mother or father, the clothes you rip when you lose your mother or father, you're not going to repair them. You're never going to wear them again. You're going to wear them all through the Shiva, but you're never going to wear them again after that. Rabbi Yehuda says, any tearing that does not rip apart the garment at the hem of the garment is nothing other than a frivolous tear of no significance, as it must be evident that one has ripped his garment in mourning, and that the rip is not merely an imperfection of the garment, even for other relatives and the parents. Rabbi Abahu said, what is the reason for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? As it is written, 2 Kings 2:12, and he took hold of his own clothes, and he tore them in 2 pieces. And from that which is stated, and he tore, do I not know that he tore them in 2? Rather, these words teach that the torn clothes must look like they were torn into 2 pieces, i.e. the tear must be obvious and visible. The Baraisa continues, with regard to all other deceased relatives, one may tack the tear with rough stitches after 7 days, and one may join the edges more carefully after 30 days, right? Especially for poor people, tearing a garment and destroying it could really be a significant impact on them. So after the 7 days, you can kind of do a loose repair so it doesn't look so torn. If you looked at it, you could definitely see that it was repaired. And then after 30 days, you could do a careful repair. But in the case of one's father or mother, he may tack the tear only after 30 days, and he may never again join the edges in a more careful manner. A woman, however, may tack the tear immediately due to her honor, for it would be dishonorable for her to be seen with torn garments. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, with regard to all other deceased relatives, if one wishes, he may rend his garment with his hand. And if he wishes, he may rend it with a utensil in a way that will preserve it. But in the case of his father or mother, he must tear his garment with his hand in a manner that will utterly ruin it. And Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, with regard to all other deceased relatives, one tears his garment on the inside, meaning he rends the inner garment and not necessarily his outermost garment. But in the case of one's father or mother, he must tear the garment on the outside. Rav Chisda said, and likewise over a nasi, one is required to rend his garment as he does over his father, right? So the most prominent Torah scholar of the generation, you tear like you would tear for your father. Rending over the nasi, one has the same obligations for one's father and for a nasi with regard to removing one's garment from one's shoulder, having the tear visible to others, and whether or not you can mender the tear. That's a nasi. We don't have a nasi now. Mourning over the leaders of the generation. When a sage dies, his study hall ceases its regular study. Actually, that's the halakha. I'm going to get to that in the Gemara first. Okay, and the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa in which it was taught, and I'm almost done, so get your questions and comments in. The Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa in which it was taught the halachas of rending for the death of other people referred to in the Baraisa, e.g. the nasi, a president of the court, or one's teacher, were likened to the halachas of tearing for one's father or mother, only with regard to the issue of carefully rejoining the edges of the tear, as in all these cases it is prohibited to mend one's garment with precise stitches. What? Is this Baraisa not also referring even to one who rends his garment for the nasi? And the Gemara rejects this. No, the Baraisa is referring to the other people aside from one who rends his garment for the nasi. As rending for the nasi is the same as rending for one's father with respect to all aspects of the rending. And it was related that the nasi died, and Rav Chisda said to Rav Hanan bar Rava, turn the mortar over and stand on it and show that rip to everyone. Everyone will then tear his garment in this manner, as everyone is required to rend his garment over the death of a nasi. And tomorrow we'll pick it up talking about just the Torah leaders of the generation, not as exalted as the nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me on such an emotional day. If you're joining in late, I was explaining earlier that I went to a funeral today for a beautiful young mother of 5 children, ages 7 months to 11 years old, who died tragically in a car accident last night. And the whole community came out for the funeral today, and we're all just bereft. And her husband is a friend of mine in our neighborhood, Minyan. There's just no words. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions or comments. Okay, Tom Beck. Where does the halacha come from? The Shulchan Ha'aruch? So the Shulchan Aruch is where all of the laws have been, tabulated, right? So the laws were basically derived by our sages. It's just that just reading them in the Talmud, we're not always sure because there's, a variety of opinions. And so, first Rambam came, right? Maimonides came and really tried to do a careful, collating of where did the law end up, having, read all of the rabbinic material, not just the entire Talmud and the Midrash and all other, and the Tosafos and all other, sources available, Tosefta rather. Just reading all the sources available and figuring out where the law ended up, right? And Rashi added, I think Rashi was before Rambam actually, right? And then, but then, right, exactly. Shulchan Aruch comes along in the 1500s, I believe. And that's pretty much the compilation of the law that we still follow, except of course there's, novel issues that have come up since that was compiled. And then, the Torah leaders in each generation have made the rulings to figure out what the new questions that our sages could never have imagined, involving cars, motorized ships, airplanes, modern medicine, all kinds of questions that they couldn't have answered. But right, exactly. So when you want to know what the halacha is, you look at Shulchan Aruch, right? And of course, there's different versions of Shulchan Aruch, right? This is the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. This is the small Shulchan Aruch. It's only 5 volumes. This is just one of 5. But luckily for most questions that come up, you can go to a place like Chabad.org, Aish.com, or OU.org, the OrthodoxUnion.org, as well as there's a couple other discussion forums that are very good. And just go to very well respected places like that when you're asking a question. But often just looking it up yourself won't quite get you there, and that's why you got to have a rabbi in your life who you can ask the questions. And if he doesn't know, he'll send you to his rabbi. Right? So that's pretty much the answer to that. Sharon, doesn't the term glatt kosher come from the term smooth because the lungs must be smooth for the meat to be glatt kosher? Yes, that is where glatt kosher comes from. These days, most butchers are glatt kosher because the people who care about kosher want glatt kosher. And that in-between step, which was more prevalent, earlier in the last century, not so much now. But it doesn't mean that, a treifa would be permissible to somebody who's kosher but not glatt kosher. It's just a sort of higher level of checking the animal to be sure. And Tom, what if a parent's death was sudden and your son or daughter was getting married before the 30 days were up? Right. See, that's the kind of question that you gotta, ask your rabbi. There's the kinds of things that could happen. Like maybe you would go for the chuppah but leave before the dancing. Maybe you would go to the wedding and then kind of stay outside the room while the music is being played. There's ways to manage it, right? And these are just the sorts of questions that would be, family and wedding and location specific. And it's not such a simple answer. And that's why you got to have a rabbi in your life when these kinds of questions come up. And that, very good, Tom. That's exactly the kind of question that would be difficult and would have to be managed, right? And then you would expect that everybody would be as caring and as careful as possible. And that question, in fact, a friend of mine was telling me they had a situation just like that, where I think what it was the parent was dying and they were rushing to get the wedding. Well, that was different. They were rushing to get the wedding done, like before he died, right? So that he would know that his child was married. And I think they did it. I think the wedding happened. Like they were under the chuppah, the ring was given, they became consecrated to each other, and they were married. And then, like within minutes, the father died. But now what you have is so now the child is an acute mourner, right? During that week when they would be having Sheva Brachos, a celebration every night for 7 days of the wedding. And what's going to be possible then, for whether it was the groom or the bride. These are the kinds of questions that come up, and it's times like this that, the fact that there are all these rules and restrictions, it's not onerous. It actually, it just becomes something that brings the whole community together, right? And because the law presents certain challenges, everyone will come to your assistance to help you work it out. I mean, this young woman who died last night, this morning, a guy in our community, another Joel, started a chesed fund. I actually shared it on our page on Accidental Talmudist to raise money for this father. The mother of 5 children also was a working mom. By the way, this idea that religious Jews, the women don't work, like ridiculous. So she, amazing attention for the kids, but was also managing to have a career. And also these 2 parents would walk the children together to school every morning. At any rate, she had income, and that's gone. And now, all the childcare that she did, it's going to be so difficult to replace. So, like raising some money for my friend Joel, now and how he's going to raise his 5 children can be very helpful to the family. So they put out this appeal this morning. And they've already raised $1 million, and something like 7,000 people have donated, from around the world. And I mean, it's like when that kind of tragedy happens, you see a community pull together, and it's just so meaningful. This Whoopi Goldberg incident, where she's tripping over, our Jews, a race or an ethnicity, religion, a tribe, a family. Being Jewish, being a Jew, Judaism defies all those categories. It doesn't fit neatly into any of those categories. It's all of those categories, and it predates any kind of attempt to categorize these things. But I think that probably, the best way to understand it is that all Jews all around the world are an extended family. And you can join that family. When you convert into Judaism, it's like you join that family. But I heard another Chabad rabbi say today, somebody who converts to Judaism, and the reason you discourage, you're always discouraged from converting. It's the rabbi's job to say, no, you don't want to do that, because if you become a Jew, now you're bound, by 606 additional obligations that you didn't have when you were a great person who's just not a Jew, but you're bound by the 7 Noahide laws. And now this person says, I want to be a Jew. And say, no, you don't need to. You could be a great person. You have a place in heaven as a good Noahide. That's all you need to do is obey those 7 Noahide laws. You don't need to be a Jew. This person says, no, I need to become a Jew. Why? Because that's a Jewish soul that happened to be born in a non-Jewish body. And he's going to convert just to come home to his family, as it were. But you really see how that extended family comes together in these crises. I apologize. I'm rambling. I'm very emotional today. I'm going to sign off. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, for the next page here in Tractate Moed Katan. And please, God, may we only hear good news. Amen.